Hey there everyone, and welcome to the release wrap-up news post for Thrawn Revenge Imperial Civil War 2.2. It's been just under a month since the release of 2.2, so we wanted to take a moment to talk about some of the common problems, what's coming in the patches, and also we're releasing one of those patches today. So not quite right when this video goes up, but later tonight. Today is May 7th, for those of you who are watching this a little bit later. So if it's already the 8th, then the patch is already up. But I'm not sure exactly when tonight, but it will be tonight. So overall, we've been pretty happy with the release of 2.2 so far. There's still a lot to be done and worked out, but the goal with 2.2 was to establish a new basic starting ground for the updates we wanted to start to make going forward, and we feel like we've accomplished that. There have been some issues, which we'll talk about today, but very little that's entirely game-breaking, and very little that we're not confident we can fix. But before we get into our direct plans, though, we want to address some of the most common problems that have come up. But before we get into that, as always, in addition to this video, there is also the written version of the news post, so if you would prefer to read that, there's a link in the description, or if you want to read that while listening to this, whatever you prefer. The information is the same in both, though. So the first issue I want to talk about is reports that if you get a crash on startup, sometimes you'll get an error that says perception parsing, something like, or mentions perception parsing errors, or perceptual equations, anything like that. When the game just starts, or when you're starting a new Galactic Conquest, or if you have any issues with building units, like if you're using the build filters and no units are showing up. This is generally caused by another mod having installed its AI or scripts folders into the Empire at War Forces of Corruption base data folder. So because they're overwriting base files with that, it'll interfere with other mods, including Thrawn's Revenge. With a lot of mods, it won't even be noticeable, but because a lot of features in Thrawn's Revenge heavily rely on being able to use our own assets, and it's all packaged together within the mod, having that overwritten is pretty problematic for us. To resolve this, the way you just have to go into your Forces of Corruption /data folder. So there's corruption/data on Steam, EAWX/data for GOG, or Star Wars Empire at War Forces of Corruption /data for the retail disc version. If you go into there and there's a folder called scripts, delete that. If you go into the XML folder within that, or within the data folder, and there's a folder named AI or enum, delete those. You won't have all three generally. You may not have any if everything's working fine for you, but if you do have those issues, that is how you solve them. If you continue to have those issues and that's not enough information, and you just leave a comment here, I'll be able to, or I'll try to help you with that. There's also written instructions on the forums for that as well. But that's thrawnsrevenge.com/forums. There's a tech support subforum, and there's common issues like that that are addressed in one of the troubleshooting threads. I'm going to link to that in the description as well, if I remember to at least. So the next issue, a lot of people have reported some planet is blink red and can't be accessed. So this has actually been one of the most common reports we've received. However, it's not actually a bug. So this is just what a locked planet in Empire War looks like. So these are planets that have been locked intentionally related to story events. So some of them are related to era progression, those being Biss and the Maw. So Biss will become accessible in Era 3, the Maw becomes accessible in Era 4, and that's to stop them, because they weren't involved in stuff before then. Palpatine was building up on Biss, Dala was stuck at the Maw. The other two major areas that have that are, and these are the ones that people tend to notice, are the Yavithan space, so where the Duskin League spawns in Era 5, and the Hapes Consortium, which spawns in, I think, around week 80. So these are intentionally locked. There was supposed to be a message that comes up and tells you when you're trying to get to it that they're locked, but the problem with that was that we can only show it for the New Republic, Empire of the Hand, or Imperial Remnant, so we had to try to think of some other ways to do it. But yeah, so it's not the cleanest. It's kind of an underdeveloped feature within the game, because Petroglyph really only intended to use it for some stuff in the campaign, but we've used it for a lot of other stuff in the mod. So it does look kind of weird, but it's honestly the best solution for the kind of things we want to try to get done with that. We do feel like having emergent factions is a good thing for it, and really we kind of just got to work with what we have there. But yeah, so it's not an issue, it's not breaking anything, that's just what that is. The next issue, when I try to load games, they'll sometimes crash. So if you're ever trying to load a save game and the game just sort of drops to desktop, this is basically a base game issue caused by memory accessibility of the program. The bad news is that it's not something we can fix because it's not caused by the mod, it's a base game issue. The good news is that the Steam version of Empire at War is going to be patched soon to address that. This does unfortunately mean that the GOG and retail disc versions will, much like with the selection freeze bug, continue to have the issues. So we may have to make certain larger Galactic Conquests, where it's especially prone to occurring, like Empire's End, Steam only. We don't want to drop support entirely for the other versions, but if it comes down to there either being no Empire's End or Empire's End only for one version, we feel like that's kind of the decision, that's the better thing to do. And mitigating this issue is also why certain things like extra VO and planet preview images, which tended to have a significant effect on the how often that issue would occur. That's why they were left out of the initial release and why we're patching them in afterwards. So we'll have to make some choices about how exactly to handle that for the GOG and retail version of the mod, or version of Empire at War, whether we'd have like there'd still be the full version intended for Steam that people can try to use, but that's kind of a use at your own risk kind of deal, and we'll try to make another version that we optimize more specifically for GOG and retail. This might mean that those come out a little bit later than other initial releases, but we'll try to find the best way we can handle that. We do recommend getting Empire at War for Steam if it's possible for you. It goes on sale pretty frequently. I know it's on sale right now as of when this video is being posted. I think it's on sale until tomorrow, actually. If it seems worth it to you to get the mods in the most stable way possible, and this applies not just to Thrawn's Revenge, but to every other Empire at War mod, this is something that actually a lot of the modders are kind of agreeing that we want to help push more, is encouraging people to get the Steam version of Empire at War if they can. And we understand it's not possible for everyone. That's why we're trying to put in the other work to put out the other versions for GOG and retail. But just know that there is some things that we can't quite fix with that, because Steam is the only one that's actively being supported by Petroglyph in terms of patches, and we don't know if that's actually going to change at any point in the future. Because really, we're lucky to get any sort of patches for any versions at this point. But yeah, so the last thing I want to talk about in this issues section is people who are reporting issues with lag in Galactic Conquest, especially on the larger one. So this is caused by the fact that Empire at War can only use a single processor core, so even the best computers will start to struggle with larger maps a little bit, especially ones that have a lot of active factions on them. 2.15's largest map was about 90 planets and had only 3 or 4 active factions counting the player, whereas in 2.2 the largest largest Galactic Conquest is Empire's End at 138 planets with up to 6 or 7 active factions. So there's a lot more going on that the processor has to keep up with. AI being a huge resource drain. This is also why we have such a wide variety of GCs as well. So regardless of your computer's strength, there should be something that works smoothly for you. If Empire's End doesn't, you can probably move down, try Art of War. If Art of War doesn't, you can move down and try Essence of War. Then you have like the ones that are 20 planets, like Stars Align. But there should be a good amount that still work regardless of what your computer is. I have a laptop that can run most of the GCs pretty well, and it's pretty old. So you should be able to find something that works for you. We're on top of that, though, we're also playing with some other factors, like modifying the AI, how active it is in certain areas, activating or deactivating certain factions, playing with stuff like hyperspace speed, which should have some impact. But at the end of the day, if you're playing 140 planet GCs with a lot of factions, you can expect a slightly lower frame rate. We had a lot of success getting some gains in performance by increasing the hyperspace speed fairly significantly, and we're going to try that again and see if we can get anything else out of that. But this is going to be something that we're playing with a lot as we go, so you may see some back and forth of that. Sometimes it'll get a lot better, sometimes it might get a little bit worse, sometimes it may not change at all, depending on what changes. So we're basically doing a lot of experiments with that. We're trying to see what we can do to improve that. So we're going to be pushing patches pretty actively to the Steam Workshop, just small stuff, trying to see if there's any difference with that. And then once we're confident that something has or hasn't worked, we'll either include it in a major patch or not. And that'll be accessible to both the mod database and Steam versions. But finally, I want to talk about the patches we have done, the patches we're going to be doing, and the patch that's coming out today. So since release, we've been working on fixing various bugs which have arisen. For the most part, we seem to have handled the biggest one so far in the 2.2.1 and 2.2.2 patches. Because Steam Workshop has automatic updates, we've generally been testing them in smaller chunks on Steam, and then we plan to do like a larger individual patch for Mod Database. So we're going to do 2.2.3 and 2.2.5 for Mod Database. The one that's coming out today is going to be for every version. So if you go to Mod Database or the Steam Workshop, you should be able to get that later today. You can see the patch notes for 2.2.1 and 2.2.2 in the Steam Workshop changelog, which I've linked to in the description. This is stuff that'll apply to every version of the game, so even though it is hosted on Steam, it'll apply to everything. And then once we upload the 2.2.3 patch tonight, those changes will be in there as well. The main thing with 2.2.3 is fixing a bug with General Koval, where he would crash the game when he's deployed, as well as there's going to be a couple new skirmish maps that we're going to try to put in, and there are the main thing that we're working on between now and 2.2.5 and what we started doing with 2.2.3 is trying to fix any of the issues that remained with error change issues. So anyways, as we approach 2.2.5, which will be the last major patch for 2.2 before moving on to new content in 2.3, we'll have four main focuses. So the first and most important is addressing any other remaining error progression issues. Once we're comfortable that it's all working properly, we'll start to add other forces to some of the emergent faction events. So the Hapens, for example, are pretty powerful, but things like the Zero Command forces were left relatively bare bones for testing purposes, mostly to make sure they weren't causing any problems, because if they crashed the script, then the progression would be broken for everything. Like the errors would still progress, but there'd be certain spawns which wouldn't work, which are fairly important. So we'll be fleshing that out more. Secondly, we're going to try to find out what's wrong with the Avethans, who we've had to disable, along with the Black Fleet Crisis and Empires at War GC. So hopefully we'll be able to figure out what's going on with them. Basically, when you attack them, there'd be a significant chance for the game to crash, which we didn't love. But yeah, so we're going to try to find a fix for that by 2.2.5 and get them patched back in. And then we'll try to flesh out the Avethans more in future versions as well. But as far as stability goes, that's our main focus right now. And the third part is we're going to start overhauling some of the documentation in the mod. So there's a lot of stuff where it's either vanilla or is not very helpful. We want to make it more consistent and informative. In the super short term, though, this will involve removing some information, like some ships have some armament information directly in their tooltip. That's going to be removed, sort of. We're going to be adding those in as separate entries within the ship's text, which basically, the reason for this is it'll make it easier for translations to happen. Then we can add in these new weapon-based tooltips without messing up the translations. So in the long term, it makes more sense to do it this way, even though in the short term it will result in some slightly less helpful information in those parts. But that should all be ready for 2.2.3, or 2.3 rather. But yeah, so that'll include stuff like unit text, hero text. We're going to try to have the manual out, which will tell you what all the hero traits and command bonuses do, because there have been a lot of questions about that. The manual is still being done, and we wanted to get it out with the full release of the mod, but 2.2.5 is going to have it with that, most likely. But yeah, so finally we're going to work on adding some multiplayer Galactic Conquest maps to the mod. This was another one of the most common questions we were asked, is where they were. We basically had to leave them out because there are so many features in the mod that rely on scripting functions that can't be used in multiplayer. So stuff like the build filters, a lot of the abilities. So basically we have to use entirely separate unit sets for that, among other changes. So we'll be starting with just one or two Empire versus New Republic scenarios, but we'll expand more on that when possible. We'd like to get something so that you can play as whichever faction you want, or not like in a single map, but have a map where you're able to do something as every faction eventually. The problem with that, though, is that because multiplayer GCs can only have one player versus one player, you then have to set up the AI factions, and it's a lot harder for balancing because then everything has to be auto-resolved that's not between the two players, which is kind of weird. But anyways, so after that's all done, we're going to be working on 2.3, so we'll be moving on to adding the new content and redoing other content. And in 2.3, that's where we're going to be adding the Corporate Sector Authority as a playable faction. We're also going to be beginning the Ground Overhaul project, as well as working on Fall of the Republic, which is our Clone Wars mod. and Ascendancy, of course, for Sins of Solar Empire. And so there's plenty to look forward to. If you want to keep track of development as it goes, in addition to these news posts, I also do preview playthroughs on this channel, as well as other kind of previews I do most Monday nights, not tonight because there's other stuff I got to do with the mod. I do live modding stuff, so I'll just answer questions about the mod while showing off sort of how the process works for doing different things. There's also tutorials and all that. So if you want to subscribe to this channel and get those updates, that's the thing to do. But anyways, thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the update video here, and hope you are enjoying 2.2 as well as the patch that's coming out tonight. So that's going to do it for now. I will see you next time. Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.